This video contains spoilers through the end of Expedition 33. Now that so many of us are getting to the end of Expedition 33, we are discovering that we have one of two endings presented to us, the Verso ending and the Mael ending, or as the internet seems to have declared them, the good ending versus the bad ending. Many of us, however, are not comfortable declaring one as good or bad. We instead are really interested in having conversations, debating the philosophy and the ethics of these two different endings, and also a lot of the debates come down to, is this a story about grief? Is this a metaphor about what it means to move on? Or is this something bigger that has to do with the collective over the individual?
For those who come after.
While I certainly think there's validity to both viewpoints and the game has presented enough information to go either direction, I did want to focus on the idea of how I think these themes could have been done in a way where perhaps the debate could be a little bit more difficult. Once Gustaf has died early in the story, it does obviously shift to having Verso and Mael as our key players. In having this shift, it definitely makes it easier for us to center the story around the Desandra family, their grief, and the way that it is eating them alive. Borderline literally. And by having this shift and having this be the thing that is relatively front and center for us for the last portions of the game, it makes it a lot easier for us to relate to the idea that these two are the real versions of people and the other versions are fictional and they're a coping mechanism, and it's easier to come away with this thought because of that shift. However, I thought personally that if we had maintained one of the characters from Lumiere as the perspective throughout the entirety of the story, I think that would have made the decision at the end and some of these debates a lot more difficult, because if we only had the experience of, let's say, Gustave throughout the story, I don't know if we would be viewing Lumiere and its inhabitants as borderline callously, or at the very least flippantly, as we are currently doing. This debate about they're not really real because they are actually just painted versions. Would we think that if we stayed with Gustave and only Gustave for the entirety of the game? There are multiple different avenues that we could go down. We could go down the idea of Gustave as the character for the entirety of the game, or we could go down the route of there being multiple playthroughs, and through these multiple playthroughs you actually start to play as different characters and the story is revealed to us in that way. We've had games do this before. For example, the Nier games are very great indications of playing through a game multiple times so that you have more of the picture and more of the pieces coming together until entire playthroughs are finally showing you the full picture. So I wanted to go through these two different versions just as a thought experiment to see, does it change our mind about which ending is good versus which ending is bad? We'll go ahead and kick it off with option A, which is that we start the story with Gustave, and while we do have some information revealed to us, we still maintain him as the main character. He never dies early on, but we do see him as our protagonist throughout the entirety of the story. Within this, we'll go ahead and pick up with when Verso joins the party. I think it's very likely that Gustave immediately would be unsure about Verso. Already, CL seemed unsure about Verso, but she seemed willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. That seems very within her character. Lune is somebody that seems like you better just bring something valuable to the table, and if you do, okay, you can join us, but the second you cross us, I'm furious. Lune more so shows that. Gustave, however, really struggles with the idea of the collective versus his love for Mael, which is in part why I think it would be so interesting to maintain him as a perspective, because I think he would actually clash really strongly with how Verso cares about Mael. But getting back to this scenario, we have Gustave now as somebody who I think would be very suspicious as soon as Verso enters the picture. Verso, I think, would naturally have somewhat of a possessiveness towards Mael because, as we know, it is her real brother, but Gustave within Lumiere was also essentially her real brother.
We could never tell if you were my brother or my father, but to me you were both. Best brother and father I've ever had.
I mean, he cared for her, and you see in the scene that we get within the game, she actually says when she's burying him that she viewed him as a brother and a father. She doesn't really know what to call him, but he was basically her everything. He was the perfect person to be her friend and to care for her and be her family. So we know that he cares very much about her. So you have now these two people that have some kind of care for Mael, who would be, I think, very unsure about each other. One of whom, however, is from Lumiere, who cares about what happens and who very strongly wants to defeat the Paintress. We've already seen everything the Paintress has taken from him. Then you have Verso, who knows more, but he's not really telling everybody, but he cares about Mael, and he seems very, very focused on trying to save her, which Gustave can relate to, but he's also going to have his suspicions. From here, the story progresses as it does in the real version of this, which is that they defeat the Paintress. Everybody is gamaged because that's, it turns out, how things are going in this world. And then when they are brought back, Gustave, you know, would be absolutely furious, especially because, while yes, there is another version of Mael that exists, Gustave still very much loved and cared for his Mael, the Lumiere Mael, so you know that he would be furious that not only did Verso do all of this and basically sacrifice all of them for his own mother, but you would see Gustave upset because there was a version of Mael that was gamaged also. I also think already the fake epilogue is going to hit even harder, and it's going to have a different tone to it because it definitely has a lot of confusion. I don't really know what's going on. It's got a lot of those feelings. But when you play as Verso, you get hints that things are not what they seem, especially when he's talking to Minoko, and Minoko is kind of like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you don't want to fill them in on more? I think if you're following Gustave, you have some ideas that Verso is not who he says he is, or at the very least, he has some hidden motivations. But you very much are determined to defeat the Paintress. So not only is there going to be confusion, but you already watched him lose this woman that he loved in the opening, and now you're watching him lose everyone. You see him lose his sister, his apprentices, his friends, and Mael all at the same time, because we do somewhat see this fake epilogue through Mael. She's sort of the last person to go, but can you imagine it being Gustave and him just watching everybody, everything he's worked for, and now he's just watching everybody and everything he loves disappear? I think it would be even more devastating than it already is, because that scene, I think a lot of us, myself certainly, I was like, did I do something wrong? The first time I got to that moment, I thought I must have missed things, and I guess I didn't do enough of the game, and I feel really bad. I'm a bad gamer. But obviously we know that that's just how the game plays out, and then it's erased, and then we start fresh again, and when Gustave comes back, I really think this is where you're going to start to see things come to a head between him and Verso. However, in this potential layout, this option A that I'm going through, in this version, we would still get the Mael reveal that she is a paintress. We would see everything within her world and Clea and her family. We would start to understand that this is a painted world, that it's fictional in a sense, depending on how you view it, but at the very least, things were not as they seemed. So we're starting to get some of this from Mael. When we return to the Lumiere world, now Gustave, as I noted, is going to want to go head-to-head with Verso. He's going to be furious, but because Mael now has her memories returned to her from Alicia, she is going to be protective of Verso too, because she's going to view both of these men as her brothers and her family. Because at this point in the real version of the game, you actually keep playing as Verso, you don't necessarily play as Mael. When you're at the campfire, for example, you're playing as Verso. I think that it would make sense in this version that I'm laying out that you would continue to play as Gustave. And in this, even though Gustave is so angry, he recognizes, similar to Lune and Ciel and Mael, that we have an opportunity to bring everyone back. Mael has the ability to bring everyone back, so while I hate Verso, I'm willing to put aside my hatred to try and bring back everybody that we love, including the person that he lost in the opening, this woman that he wanted to have a life with but couldn't really because their world was doomed. I think he would especially see so much hope. He already had hope when he went off on this expedition. He already was trying to carry everybody on his shoulders and all these burdens, but I think even more so now when he sees the potential of not just we defeated the Paintress, but we can bring back those we lost to the Gamage. I think that this is going to be so emotionally motivating for him and for us as the players of the game. However, he is also, as we're progressing further toward having this final showdown with Renoir, he is discovering that if Mael were to stay and if Lumiere were to come back, it does mean in some ways that Mael very likely is going to die in order to do this. And early on, you actually see this standoff between Gustaf and Lune, where Lune is very determined to defeat not only the Paintress, but to try and save their world. And there is a little bit of a moment where Gustaf thinks, I don't care about the expedition, I just want to find Mael, I just care about Mael. So we know that he has a little bit of that in him too. It's not just Verso, he also at times starts to think more about the individual rather than the collective. And I think as you progress, it would be something he really wrestles with, and he would start to question his own existence. He might even start to wonder if his life is worth Mael's life. If they've already lost people, then are they really losing them again if you don't ever actually bring them back? Maybe it would be better for Mael to go. I think that you would have this discrepancy in his feelings. I think that this would be felt by us, the players, a lot stronger, but also because we've been playing the whole time as him, we want him to have that callback to have everybody come back and his apprentices and everybody he loves, and then maybe we can see him a little bit more with his sister and he can finally be at peace and he no longer has to carry this burden on his shoulders. He just gets to live his life happily. And yes, it does mean that Mael is potentially going to be hurting, but it's a lot harder for him to grasp because he's not really seeing it and he doesn't understand it. Maybe he's starting to understand Verso a little bit more, and maybe this does kind of bring them together a bit. And that also would make the decision that much harder too, because I think Verso could come to begrudgingly really respect Gustaf and care about him. And also it takes away what is for me the worst scene of the game, which is him admitting that he didn't save Gustaf on purpose. We just scrapped that because obviously in this scenario Gustaf lives, so Verso must have shown up in time and saved him. But I think that this would be so much more difficult of a decision come the end when you have to decide, do I side with Mael? If you're playing as Gustaf, you've seen the whole time, you're viewing everybody through his eyes, but you also care about Mael. I think it makes that decision so much more difficult, and I think it also really makes us question a lot more the idea of, are the people of Lumiere real? Because we've only ever really known his feelings. Now going into option B, which is just that we only play as him and we only have everything through his eyes, literally, meaning we don't get that reveal with Mael in the same way after the fake epilogue. Further clarifying, within this playthrough, everything plays out essentially the same as how I described it within the option A, but however here in option B, we see that there's the Gamage, and then suddenly we start after what would be the fake epilogue. Instead of the fake epilogue being shown to us on your first playthrough, you wake up from the Gamage as Gustaf, and Mael suddenly has white hair, and she's explaining to you, I'm actually a Paintress too, I just didn't know it. And she's trying to explain things to you, but you have no idea of all the reveals that you would have normally gotten. So you're left in the dark, you only have Gustav's awareness of things. And so this all sounds absurd, which I actually think feeds really, really well into some of the logs that you get within the game, because there are logs where you actually hear a little bit more with Verso, and Verso thinks, I want to explain to people, I want to tell people, but I don't think they're going to believe me. Or I'm trying to tell them and now they question me even more and they think I have ulterior motives and they actually are starting to see me as a villain, but I swear I'm not a villain. All of those things, I think you would feel that much stronger if you wake up and you're Gustaf and you're being explained to, but you don't really understand. You start to question, has Mael been lying? Does she really not know? She seems to care about Verso now, but this guy betrayed us. I don't know what to think. Am I even in the same Lumiere that I was in before? I think that your reality would feel really, really warped, but because you don't have that fake epilogue scene, you just have this to go off of. You would be rooting for, okay, well, if you're telling me we can bring everybody back, then fine. Okay, fine that you wanted to save your mom, so long as we can bring everybody back. So let's work toward that. And it would feel so heroic as you go through and you're bringing back all of these people. Then from there, you actually get to play the game again, but instead of playing as Gustaf, maybe this time around you play as Mael, or maybe this time around you actually play the entirety of the game through Verso. I'm not going to take the time to lay out some kind of hypothetical because I still wanted the whole core of this to be a what if scenario following Gustaf, and how that actually, I think, adds additional layers to the debates that are happening in the philosophy that is centered around these two different endings. I more so wanted that to maintain itself as the focus. So I'm not going to try to lay out what would we do with Mael, then what would we do if we were following Verso, because I think that's just a fun hypothetical, but it's going to stay as just something for any of us to imagine. That said, it's very possible that if we're playing Verso the second time around, that you could still end up with a Verso ending. I think that could be interesting because you see that alternative, and I think that go around you then think, wait, I don't know if I liked this though, because then we didn't save anybody. All of this was pointless, and I guess they're not real, but they felt very real to me the first time around. You're telling me I'm just supposed to forget all these people that I was with for the whole game, the first playthrough? Then you have a potential third playthrough where you get to now choose? That would be devastating. I mean, we all want a third ending, which perhaps will be a future video, but let's say there is no third ending. It would be so heartbreaking to get to the end, and instead of having it chosen for you, you now have to choose. Like, this is for you as the player, the canon ending. Do you choose the Verso version where everybody in Lumiere is lost, but Mael lives and Verso dies? Or do you choose the version where everybody in Lumiere now is alive, but maybe they're not going to live forever, because if Mael dies, are they going to die? And you have all these other things that are left somewhat unanswered, and there's still things to debate, but at least it feels a little bit better. You have these two choices and you have to make them now that you have not only the full picture, but you've played as individuals who represent these themes. I think more in they're manifesting those things in their very existence kind of way. Not only do I think this represents the themes in a really interesting and fascinating way, but I also think it begs the question of what even is the theme of the game then, if that's the scenarios that are laid out for us. Certainly still grief, I think, is a major focus here. We also have Gustave's grief being a little bit more of a focus, the grief of the collective, the grief of this family. We see grief still certainly as a focal point. I also think the idea of what it means to exist, what it means to be alive, that actually I think is drilled in even harder with either option, whether you play through this as a hybrid of what we've gotten but with Gustave, or you play through it as multiple different playthroughs where you have certain information based off of which character you're playing as. Possibly, though, it also holds up a mirror to our own shortcomings. In the scenario I laid out, I purposefully still had us playing as Gustave first, then Verso, because certainly once we're with a different group and a different character and we see them as the center of the story, I do think there's also this horrifying question that we're presented with, which is, are we too quick to rob someone of their humanity? That then turns everything around, rather than simply being this outward debate about philosophy and ethics. It begs the question to ourselves, am I swayed so easily depending on the newest bit of information I've been shown? Do I need to do more to take a step back and ask the tough questions? It's no longer simply a debate online, and a fun debate certainly, and a meaningful debate. It's not just that, but it's something that makes us question ourselves. Obviously, we can certainly question ourselves given what the game has already delivered upon. I'm not by any means trying to say that this would be an improvement and this is what the game should have done. It was just a scenario that I liked playing through in my head, asking myself, what would this have felt like? And would we all feel the same if we were to have followed Gustave the whole time? I also think that there are obviously wonderful themes that are shown within this. I already laid out the grief versus what it means to be alive, and currently that's how I feel it is showcased to us, is it's almost one versus the other. You have to believe in the Verso ending if it's predicated on the idea that everybody within Lumiere doesn't exist. But if you really ask yourself, like, do they exist, and you come to the conclusion that they did, then it makes that ending way less sweet and happy. It makes it disturbing almost to see it presented so happily when you think, wait, but is it? And I just really like the idea that it really showcases difficult ideas, and they did such a great job giving us this. But also, I'm sure I'm not the only person that is holding out for there being some kind of third ending. There's some kind of DLC that's going to come out and it's going to give us more information. Maybe we'll learn more about the writers. I actually will have a video coming up where I do something similar. I explore not necessarily a what if, but somewhat of a what if and also a theory when it comes to the writers. So if you're interested in that, be on the lookout because it will be up soon. I would love to know though, based off of the scenarios that I laid out, did that make you a little bit question how you viewed the ending? Do you think that this would have been a really fun thing to have as part of the game, or do you just like thinking of it as a thought experiment and nothing further? Do you think it would have been tedious to have it in this way? Do you think the game is perfect as is? What are your thoughts on this? And also just what are your thoughts on the endings in general? I definitely want to do more deep dives into those. So not only am I going to be doing something with a theory theme, but I also will be looking at the endings too. Thanks so much though for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later.